Hello,
Hi,
I'm Alex,
and I'm Val.
and we're going to talk about Sopranos.
We are,
We're going to talk about Eloise,
which is season 4, episode 12.
12. Getting near the end of the season.
Well, it's
Well,
the
getting
episode
very near
before
the
end of the season.
Yeah. So it's an interesting penultimate episode. It's different than what we've had in the past. The show is established, in some cases, the penultimate episode being the case where we actually have some of the most drama happening.
Right.
But in this episode, it's actually kind of anticlimactic in a lot of ways.
Totally. Yeah, we don't, they fooled us again.
Yeah, in fact, in many ways, it seems like almost everything is resolved. At the end, I mean, Furio is left.
Yeah.
The only thing for me that kind of seems hanging on is that meeting that Tony has with Johnny Sack near the very end of the episode in the car, where it's like, oh man, something could really be happening of this, and in the next episode there could be some drama of Tony interpreting Johnny Sack's words to actually go after Carmine. So that is kind of setting up something major, so we'll have to see what they do with that and how climactic it
And
turns out
maybe
to be.
like some drama between Meadow and Carmela.
But in some ways it kind of seems resolved to me, because Meadow actually asserts herself as a mature person and realizes that there's something going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And actually realizes that there's something happening here that is bigger than she realized, and she actually needs to be compassionate to her mother.
Right.
To look out for her.
Right.
I think in all ways in this episode, Meadow is established as a very strong, independent, beautiful woman,
Yeah,
which is
well-
exactly what the last thing. Well, no, I say that because
Okay.
I was saying, sorry, what I meant to say was smart, beautiful, independent woman, which is because that is where the show is actually left
Right.
off.
That
And
wasn't
is-
just your own feelings.
That wasn't just
about
my own
Meadow.
feeling that
Yeah.
I just wanted you to know about, and
Yeah.
everybody else.
Cool.
Because Tony says, isn't that what you dreamed about?
I think that's an interesting line.
It's a very interesting line. And then Carmela says, looking at the camera, yes.
Yeah.
And the way that he says that is, it's unclear, the way that he claims smart, beautiful, independent woman, because the way that it's stated could be applying to Carmela too, and she obviously is interpreting it that way. Interestingly, it's coming from a conversation where he's claiming about how she's growing to be so mature, so thoughtful. It's very clear that it's about her. He says she can do whatever she wants, and they talk about her in a way where she's kind of developing into exactly what they dreamed about for their daughter. And I think largely that is a centerpiece of this episode, because Meadow is becoming this very independent person. Even the first time we see her in an apartment where Carmela meets the other mom, who says, oh, I'm sorry I haven't been here for so long, because she's a teacher in Akron. And yet it's the first time that we're seeing it. So we have a level of detachment from her life now too.
Yeah.
It establishes in sense of a time frame that it's been a while, and the mother actually feels guilty about not being there. And for us as viewers who have been so invested in Meadow, we haven't seen her. We hadn't known about Finn, who's just brought up very nonchalantly.
Well, the line that brings him up is when Carmela comes in that time, and she says to Meadow, like, what's the matter? Is it Finn?
Yeah.
And we're like, Finn?
Yeah.
Unless, you know who Finn is already.
Well, we've seen this show a lot, so we did know who Finn was.
But yeah, no, we're totally separated from Meadow, which I think it carries greater symbolism for the show as well, right? Meadow's removed herself, not entirely, and those topics are brought up, right? Like if she needs money, she's still going home, right?
Yeah.
Even if she were to transfer to Northwestern, right, her parents would still be footing the bill of that, I imagine.
Yeah.
But she has, in a lot of ways, separated herself from Soprano world, right? Ever since Jackie died, we really haven't seen her since then.
Yeah.
It's been like, very limited time that we've been given with Meadow since then, since she ran away from that party in the end of season 3.
And I think that's a very imperative scene, where at the end of season 3, we see her running away from the family across traffic, which is a scene that's replicated in the series finale. And I think that this season is really building on the theme of Meadow getting out of Tony's orbit and getting out of the Soprano orbit. And everything she's doing is actually leading her to become a very kind of desirable character. Like she's
again.
I just thought I'd set that one up there a little bit.
Yeah.
But she's becoming this dream of what somebody could I wish you could see Val's face. She has why don't we talk about how great I think Meadow is?
Yeah, I know. Let's do that.
that is not really my intention here. But I think that the character of Meadow Soprano, I'm speaking strictly on a character basis.
It's very strange to
I'm
do
actually-
a podcast with your husband.
I'm actually, I mean, you know me, I'm more interested in like character development than any of these things.
Yes.
This is actually like my soft spot. I'm
Yes.
like, ooh, wow, like Terrence Winter really did a great job on bringing up the themes.
Yes, I do know that about you.
But we see her having a degree of independence, being able to speak and reference these academic readings. She understands things on a deeper level than her family does, even in some ways. Like when they're talking about Billy Budd, Carmela says that she's seen the movie, and she says that it's about an innocent sailor picked on by an evil boss. And it's such a simplistic reading.
It's kind of like AJ's paper about it, right?
Right. Well, also that AJ
say?
is reading it to Carmela to get help, and he's
Right.
saying like,
it's about how mean people can be.
people could be. Like the writing is so bad.
Yeah.
And of course he gets a C. And and I think that is also something that Meadow very cruelly brings up when she's saying, "Oh, I could be like you. I could go to Montclair and drop out."
Yeah.
And she's really like hitting her in the Achilles heel right there, in the jugular, in the
Yeah.
Achilles
I don't
jugular.
think you can hit someone in the Achilles heel.
You could hit Achilles in his heel, and it would probably hurt him.
I guess so.
He'd probably be fine. It's okay. We digress. But what were we talking about?
We were talking about AJ's paper, Carmela's
Right.
take on Billy Budd.
Right, but there is this theme that's established of Carmela now possessing a much higher degree of education than her family. And it really...
Meadow possessing a higher degree of education than her family. Sorry,
Yes.
I would have thought you would have known that, how much you love Meadow.
Good point. Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, thank you. That's why we keep each other on track. So Meadow is really established as somebody who's kind of operating in a different sphere now.
Yeah.
In a different orbit
With
than that of the
princesses.
Sopranos. Yeah, and even like the shot there, the way they set up that shot is really interesting. Like head on, it almost makes it look like Carmel and Tony are on one side, kind of like the head of the table. They're not really. Like they're
There's on, like, a
surrounded on
side of
they're
the
on a
table
side, but it's
together.
head on to them.
Yeah.
But they're surrounded by all these others, and we can feel the mismatch of cultural ideas, of education level, of reading things beneath the surface in the case of the Billy Budd story. And they really are surrounded by, this Infanta de Gracia, this talk about skiing, this very kind of like,
Right.
like expensive hobby that they would not have
Who knew that Meadow
participated
had
in.
ski equipment, though?
Well, I guess she can just go and it's fine.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. I want to talk more about Meadow
Yeah.
because I also think she's great.
Do you think she's beautiful? Smart? Independent?
I guess. But I also want to come back to the Billy Budd story, so maybe I want to put a pin in that for a second. The scene that I love the most, I think, like, one of the scenes that endears me the most to Meadow, because, like, frankly, I think she can be a bit of an asshole.
Right.
And pretentious, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I do struggle, like, with my reading of Meadow. And I'm someone who comes from academia, right? So, like,
Right.
it's not even like I'm judging that, but I find her to be pretty pretentious, right?
Right.
Like, she says things to Carmela like, and there's people who didn't grow up with running water, but you wouldn't know anything about that.
Right.
Right? And it's like, Meadow, you don't know anything about
Right.
that,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes I just kind of want to shake her a little bit. But I think the scene...
I mean, I guess she knows more because she has been volunteering at the Bronx Law
Okay,
Center.
okay,
I know, no,
yeah,
you're right.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
she
yeah.
doesn't have the right to, like, get on that high horse
Yeah.
because she's been doing it for, whatever,
a
6
second.
months.
Yeah. Anyways, but the scene that I think is probably, for me, like, maybe one of the only scenes where I really feel like Meadow actually is a well-adjusted and intuitive person is when she's sitting on the
staircase.
steps with Tony. And just the way she's able to read that and be really, like, she can sense Tony's discomfort and nervousness, and he's disclosing stuff to her, like, like she didn't know he was in therapy, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, and he's actually being really honest. He thinks he's being honest with her. He doesn't know the other levels of it either, and she can really sense that. And that's, again, maybe one of the first times they've had, like, an honest discussion, right? And they have these little discussions through the show. We've talked about them as they've come up. But Meadow in that scene, for me, is just, like, really mature and really intuitive
Yeah.
and really compassionate towards both of her parents, right? Who both are
Yeah.
in their own ways, annoying and frustrating to be around.
Yeah.
And it was frustrating for her to have them at her dinner party. Like Tony's, saying no offense to Colin when they talk about gay people, and he's like, I'm not gay, and Carmela's saying all sorts of other things, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's difficult to deal with when your parents are weird and doing weird things. And so the fact that she was then able to go there and have that level of like a very understanding and compassionate conversation and not disclosing information that can hurt people, because she, in this episode, like at the tea at the plaza, she was like hitting the Achilles heel, as you put it. She was
that's how Achilles died, right? So they just like hit him in the heel. They just like got a stick and just like tapped him.
Yeah. No, but she was like really pulling all the punches on Carmela. Like, she wasn't holding back things that could hurt Carmela. Right? Like when she said the thing about Montclair University, or I forget, there's another example. But with Tony, she did. Right? Like, she held back information that, like, she could have been like, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what she would have said. But anyway, so that's, like, actually, like, for me, one of the first times that I actually really like Meadow a lot.
I think there's other examples in this episode, too, because even after her parents come in, they do act really weird, and it's kind of an unmitigated disaster, right? Where, like, Carmela goes completely off the rails and is saying these crazy things, and then afterwards, Meadow calls her. She's saying, like, are you mad at me or whatever? But she's saying, like, why don't we go to Park Plaza for the Eloise thing that we do? And that's actually very thoughtful.
Well, that's what Carmela says. I don't know. Again, it's kind of like the last time where
I think she's doing it for Carmela, though.
Yeah.
She's grown up. We've had in the show already in a previous season her falling out of that tradition. Her coming back to it, I think, is her passing an olive branch to. I'm just like mixing up all my.
I was gonna say throwing a bone to Carmela.
Throwing a bone to her Achilles jugular.
Yeah. No, I see that. I also, like, it also does bring me back to, like, when she bought Carmela, like, the spa gift certificate for Carmela's birthday, but it was paid for.
It's better. She's getting better than that.
I don't know. Like, there is something about it still. It's like, I'll invite you to pay for tea at the Park Plaza. You know what I mean? Anyway, I just have a little
improving.
Thing about
It's her birthday, though, right?
It's Meadow's birthday.
It's Meadow's
That's
birthday.
Correct. You're right.
You're not. I think actually she's doing it out of compassion.
You're right.
And it's interesting, like, that scene that is very compassionate. She is, like, you're talking about her intuitive nature. Tony's talking about how Carmela's upset. Meadow asks, how come? Tony throws out these kind of platitudes, kids growing up. Then he comes out with the word unfulfilled.
Yeah.
And that's when things really changed.
Yeah.
Meadow really latches onto that. I think she realizes what's actually happening. She says to him, you really think that's it? Then Tony says, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Then she kind of pieces it together from her conversation with AJ. She knows what's happening. And then she makes her decision to say it's probably the beginning of menopause.
Yeah.
She plays into Tony. But there's two things that are interesting for me in that scene. One is that Meadow does read that deeper surface and has the ability to do that, which Tony doesn't. And Carmela didn't. Even, like in her interpretation of Billy Budd in this episode, there's a kind of simplistic reading of these things. And there's constantly in this show this black and white outlook on a lot of issues that are very simplistic. And I think actually they play with that in this episode in terms of Carmela playing with some color things that we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But I think that Tony and Carmela symbolize this simplistic black and white way of dealing with issues that doesn't have the ability to go beneath the surface. And Meadow has escaped to be outside of that, and she is able to comprehend things beneath that simple level. And I think that she realizes what's happening, and then she makes it simple and in a thoughtful way for Tony.
Yeah.
And she knows that there's a problem with her mother, and she will deal with it. It's also interesting that this happens on the stairs, where there's so many examples of people acting callously and not compassionately towards others on staircases in this show. And I think it's interesting that Meadow is the one who has this moment of compassion on the stairs, and I think it's very intentional. And I believe that it's this kind of newness in the new generation of her transcending the lack of empathy, the lack of compassion, and having a new characteristic that we actually can respect.
Yeah, but does AJ, like, if you're talking about a new generation, like, does
No,
he...
AJ's fucked. AJ sucks.
Yeah, there's a lot of focus on Tony and the stairs. Like, we see him come up and down those stairs a number of times in this episode, so I think you're right. Like, I think it is really pointing out that, I mean, obviously, like, you know, kind of like we saw last time, like, you know, just because this show one time told us that bad things happen on the stairs doesn't mean they always have to follow their own protocol.
Right.
But I think that it is meaningful that Meadow has an opportunity to display cruelty, right? Like, because she has, like I said, like in this episode, she did display some cruelty and some beautiful maturity or whatever too. But,
smart, beautiful, independence.
but she actually, like, you could see her kind of making that choice there, right?
Yeah.
Like, and reading Tony and seeing Tony's face. So I think that for me, that's kind of the key, is like making a choice.
Right. Totally. And I think that that's something new that we don't see a lot coming from The Sopranos.
Yeah.
So I think from that season 3 finale, she has followed this trajectory. And as we finish season 4, she's very far away. She's the furthest she's ever been from The Sopranos and their values.
And maybe she'll go to Northwestern.
Maybe she'll go to Northwestern with Finn, and she'll be even further away. Finn's going to become a dentist, and they'll all live happily ever after.
It's going to be so nice.
Yeah.
I also liked how, just like, I don't have too much more on the Meadow stuff, but I thought it was interesting, and maybe this also kind of like ties into the Billy Budd and the gay stuff. I don't know. But Meadow asks Carmela, what do you have against love? Right? Well, she's like, because she's being mean. They're at the Park Plaza. She's like, I was merely pointing out to you what literary critics had to say about it, right? Like, being such a
It's too
jerk.
bad she didn't actually end up with Noah Tannenbaum. That would have been the perfect match
No,
for
I
you.
swear, like, that's why I hate Noah Tannenbaum, and it's why I hate a lot of people. But anyway, but she goes from that to saying, what do you have against love?
Right.
And I think that Carmela's relationship with love is really, really complicated. Like, you know, at the end of the episode, she's watching How to Marry a Millionaire, right? She has these really intense feelings for Furio, right? That we see kind of like more clearly than ever in this episode. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that too. But she, you know, she says that to Rosalie a few episodes back, right? That she loves him.
Yeah.
And now she's, you know, devastated by his departure, where like there's never, all they ever did was make a date to go to Color Tile place.
Color Tile.
Color Tile? Is that
right.
what it's called?
That is.
And she reads a lot of these romance books, right? Like she reads this kind of like, I don't want to call it like chick lit, but like old lady chick lit.
Yeah.
And I don't know what her relationship to love is, because I don't know what she would classify her relationship with Tony as. I think like she probably like, you know, obviously she has strong feelings for him because she's married to him and puts up with his nonsense.
Yeah.
She loves her kids.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It seems like in this episode that Carmela does have something against love because of the kind of like, I don't know, like how she treated Meadow.
There's definitely an aspect of jealousy here.
Yeah, maybe it's just jealousy, but yeah, maybe it is kind of like a lack of understanding of that. And that's where like the gay thing kind of tied in for me, right? Like, because she was really mad about that. I was trying to figure that out, but like, you know, like whatever.
Leslie Thieler, maybe he's gay.
Actually, well, she said it, he's a she. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
But, you know, like your sexual identity, right, is about, I guess, not love all the time, but it is about like who you are free to love and choose to love, right? And Carmela doesn't feel like she's free to choose who she loves, right?
No,
she's not.
Yeah.
She's quite constrained in who she's allowed to love, and that is Tony and her kids. Yeah. Tony's not constrained, right? Like we see that scene with Icelandic stewardess. I believe that's still her.
Actually, I think it's somebody new.
Somebody new,
Yeah.
another blonde woman, and Furio's looking on really angrily, right?
Yeah.
I really like that scene too. But yeah, so he has this freedom to love in whatever way you want to take it, whoever he wants. But she doesn't.
Yeah.
So I think she kind of does have something against love. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is just jealousy. But I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah. There's a few other things that I had in this episode too between Meadow and Carm that I thought were interesting. I do think that the key thing there is this aspect of independence that Meadow has and Carmela doesn't,
Right.
that she's striving
Right.
for. And I think that largely that is what her jealousy revolves around.
Right.
And I think that's probably the hardest thing for her. She is constrained to loving such a limited amount of people. And Meadow now has the freedom. And Meadow even says to her mother, like, aren't you happy for me?
Yeah.
Which she's not.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think the writers and the people behind the show, they are trying to paint a picture of Meadow that is, I know it's hard for you, but I do think she is supposed to come across very well right now, actually. There's a lot of
Really?
like...
I don't think the writers are that simplistic. I don't think any character is supposed to come across as really well or really
I don't
whatever.
know.
Like,
Okay, that's interesting because I think that
I think
her
they're all
decision to
dicks. They're all assholes.
in their own way, they're not perfect. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that she's a perfect character. But
It seemed like you were.
I just think she's perfect. Jamie Lynn, if you're listening, I think you're perfect.
Oh God. Oh God.
No, that's actually not what I'm saying. But I do think that decision that Meadow makes to extricate herself from the family is a rare example of where we can respect what a character is doing. And the way that they establish and set up her life in season 4 at this point, where we haven't been monitoring her, we haven't been tracking her, and we can see where she is, I do think that we're supposed to think that this is better. And that the life that she has is an improvement over the life that she has while she's in this New Jersey mob.
Yeah, but it's like it's paid for by her family. It's a nice
course.
ass apartment. Like,
Yeah, I mean, that would be a great apartment to live in.
like, how do they have that apartment,
Right.
right? I guess, like, her princess friend also has a lot of money, and her, I don't
Right.
know what Colin...
Finn's talking about his Morningside Heights place, and he'll...
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's... Yeah.
Well, I wonder, sorry, so we live in New
Actually,
York
that's-
City,
that's
so I wonder
probably-
if he's, like, further uptown than them. That was my...
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Probably. And
Yeah.
actually, also, if you think about... I feel like he was trying to say that like it was not supposed to be that nice. But interestingly, if you think about when the show was coming out in the early 2000s, I mean, Morningside Heights was nice, but it's not what it is now either.
Yeah.
But
But it
yeah,
was still by
it's
Columbia.
complicated.
I don't
It's
know.
still complicated, I guess. But it's hard to maybe tell from right now what they mean from that statement,
Yeah.
from where they live.
Anyways.
Anyway, but I think there's just a lot of things. Meadow making the chicken cacciatore, Tony's commending her. I think, the other students saying that she keeps them alive with their cooking. There's small things, but they are rare examples of somebody thinking about other people and doing something kind.
Right.
We almost never get that. And I think, Finn as well, for her to be drawn to somebody, we don't know a lot about him yet, but for him to be
He's
this
like
Navy
a
brat,
worldly person.
Carm, so you've been all over the world then. And that's new. I mean, for what Carmela is kind of striving for, he has something that you'll never see in Soprano world.
Right.
Think about like Polly Walnuts and his trip to Italy.
Right.
And then think about somebody who's, seen the world and these people in the apartment who are analyzing Billy Budd with this queer theory. Like, it's just so far outside of what we've come to know.
Yeah.
We've just landed somewhere very different.
Yeah.
And I do think, and maybe I'm reading now, but I do think that David Chase and the others, there is an aspect of, yeah, like maybe it's pretentious, but I don't know. I feel like it's meant to be created as something that is a positive step forward.
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe that's too simplistic.
Yeah.
I think that extrication from the family has been a good thing.
I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't say like it's been a bad thing for Meadow. I wouldn't choose the opposite point, but I think it's as complicated as staying in the world.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it is.
Like,
And it has its own positives and negatives. And
Yeah.
they've obviously dealt with the theme of pretension with having Noah Tenenbaum as a
yeah,
character.
I think David Chase just really wants to deal with the concept of
Maybe-
pretension.
I think actually you'd get along great with him. You could bitch about all sorts of things.
I want to
Be
see.
really
I want to
good.
see him on the street. He lives on the Upper East, right?
I know. We should just go hang out there.
Yeah.
See if we can find him. There's some other things too in that episode and that were interesting between Carmel and Meadow, like that dynamic between getting to the city.
I know.
Which was interesting where...
Well, that was in the same call where she offers the Eloise thing, which is why I didn't see it as the most loving phone call.
But interestingly, and it is pretentious, and it is like not that cool to bring it up this way, but why would she take the George Washington Bridge to get to Midtown?
I don't know. Maybe she was coming from somewhere else in Jersey.
That's true. You have a good point.
And
she knows how to drive. It's interesting.
Maybe there's traffic in the tunnel. Does Meadow know that? No.
This is pre-Google Maps.
Yeah.
Carmela's just going on her savvy of driving for years, and Meadow's just upending that.
Meadow said she was going to be on the Upper West Side.
That's true. Yeah.
So, or actually, she just said she was going to be
on the West Side. And that's why anyway, we don't need to get too far into the New York geography.
I know.
But it is interesting because then Carmela brings that back at the Park Plaza.
Yeah.
And she's still harping on it. Like, it's an instance where she has the ability to turn things kind of sour.
Yeah. I think at first she was trying to just make a joke.
Right.
She was talking about where she parked or whatever.
Right.
Anyways.
There's also some interesting things like at the Park Plaza they're both wearing all white.
Yeah.
Which I was thinking about in a couple different ways. Obviously, we've discussed the importance of white and black in the show at different times.
And the white gloves.
And so seeing them all in white and the color scheme at the Park Plaza is basically all white and black. It's all very simple and everybody around them is either wearing one of those two shades. Also, though, I was thinking about white being the color of the suffragettes, and as of right now, having the State of the Union just happening and all of the Democrats wearing white, and about that being the historical significance relating to the suffragette movement and feminism. It just got me thinking. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I don't know if that was intentional, but thinking about that moment to have both of them in very strong white.
Yeah, yeah.
White gloves, all white clothing.
White tablecloths, white.
Just thinking about feminism, what it means to be a smart, beautiful, independent woman.
Well, it means different things in different generations, right?
Exactly.
And it looks really different. I think it's also tied in with that kind of whatever, like gender expression or sexual identity kind of thing too, right? Which was really hard for Carmela to deal with in that Billy Budd conversation. But it's like that's, newer wave feminism deals with those issues, whereas older feminism did not.
Right.
Right. So it is kind of like an interesting counterpoint of those two characters.
Yeah. And speaking of the colors, because how can I resist? I wish I could put down my reading list of late. It's just all color books.
Yeah.
But it plays in well. So interestingly, that's a scene that I was discussing right there where we see lots of whites and blacks. From that point onwards, there's multiple examples of going to this black and white color scheme around Carmela and Tony. When they're talking and Tony is showing his lack of empathy and he's saying, my key guy just went to Naples. And obviously Carmela's just sitting there and obviously we know that he's really not reading this well. Going back to the beginning of the episode saying you probably got your hair cut.
Because of Pie.
Yeah, where this is interesting is the Carmela's clothing in terms of reflecting where she's at throughout the episode. And so right now we're starting at commenting on things that are closer to the end, and we've actually kind of regressed to this black and white color scheme. If you look at things from the beginning, we see her at Furio's house wearing this very vibrant pink. They make a date to Color Tile, which is a place that we've actually seen where she met with I want to say Vic Musto, not the appraiser, the contractor.
Vic Musto?
It is Vic Musto.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. I'm getting confused with the appraiser and the names. Anyway, so that's actually a place that has been identified as a place where we talked about that color that's broad and all the things that we're seeing there and something that she's seeking. So we see her in Furio's house wearing this vibrant pink. Then, when Carmela's waiting for Furio after the casino, she's wearing this very vibrant lime green floral clothing.
Well, and Furio was wearing a very vibrant silky shirt.
He sure was. So then, after that, when she realizes that Furio's left, she goes to his house, and she's wearing her very green shirt. And you see, actually, the garage covered all in green tape in the background there. And those are interesting colors because they're so kind of like fluorescent. Mm-hmm. I feel like Carmela is looking for color, and that's something that they've done in this show before, of using color to show something that exists outside of the soprano world, which typically is represented from blacks and whites. And that represents a way of seeing the world and a way of judging everything.
Right.
And so I think that Carmela is really striving for something different, and her clothing actually represents that. From after that point, from after when Furio leaves, her clothing really changes. So she's on the phone with Meadow in the scene that we've already talked about. She's wearing like this deep red. So now we're actually going to the like negative end of the color wheel. So and then we're going from there to blacks and whites, all whites at Park Plaza. And then we're going to black and white between Tony and Carm. It's really interesting. So there's this evolution of color in terms of what she's wearing that reflects her mood.
Yeah. Well, we have really interesting scenes with Carmela in this episode too. Like when she does go by Furio's house for that second time, right? Like, so she goes by his house earlier where you're talking about those greens. And then she goes by his house again after that woman at the church, who I guess is a real estate agent, who Furio listed his house. It all happens very fast.
It all happens very fast.
I guess he listed his house with her. We don't know her. But then she goes by his house again, right, and is peering through the window. We have that great scene of like the zoom out on the window, right, and she's just.
And if you want a great analysis of that, visit Sopranos Autopsy, as we often say.
He does a great job of that one.
And a great image sequence actually, where he has the zoom out, and then he has the zoom out where instead of the frame as presented in the show, he actually changes it all to black, except for Carmela's face, and then just talks about that use of black space and how she's constantly being more and more engulfed by it. It's really, really thoughtful, really well done.
Yeah. There was another one that I was going to pick up on, but I lost my train of thought. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Colors?
No, it was about Carmela.
Oh, Carmela. Oh, man.
Yeah.
So excited.
I was not paying attention to colors in this episode
that's
very
okay.
much.
You don't. I do enough color talk for the two of us. Also between Carmela and Furio too, like Carmela is clearly dealing with a lot in actually that instance where she's wearing the lime green clothing. She gets a phone call, and it's from Meadow after she's tried Furio. So she calls Furio, and
Meadow
she's left a message, or sorry, she hasn't left a message. She gets a call back. She thinks it's Furio, and actually that tension kind of infiltrates her call with Meadow, which kind of sets up what happens later on in the episode, which is really interesting. Like we can see very directly the impact that has and how it manifests itself throughout the course of the episode.
The interesting thing for me in this episode, kind of as a whole, well, kind of two things. One thing is the tie back to last episode where we have Tony's dreams. And so the fact that Tony ends the episode by saying, "Isn't this what you dreamed about?" I think is really funny, because we had that whole discussion last week of like, what are dreams? And it's like, dreams are wishes, right? Melfi said, or wish fulfillment or something like that.
Yeah.
So I just thought that kind of framing was really interesting in terms of dreams, right? Like, what are the things that are going on? We know we don't know, but we have more insight into what's going on in Tony's subconscious, but we get fewer insights into Carmela's unconscious or subconscious or whatever you want to call it. Like, what does Carmela dream about, right? Like, where is she at? Because she's not dealing with this very well, right? Like, this disappearance of this guy who, like, she had a crush on, has really put her into a tailspin. Yeah. Like, big time. So you kind of buy into it because it's kind of been this like weird slow build of it for this whole season, but it's pretty weird. Like, it's the sign of something, how am I going to say this? Like, it's not something that someone who's like happy and well adjusted would develop and then feel so heartbroken about, right? Like, it's clearly like indicative of something larger going on with Carmela. Yeah. So that thing then about dreams, like, I just thought that kind of like wrapped it into a nice bundle for me. But then the other thing is this trip that Tony at the very beginning of the episode plans to take her on. I don't know over how many days this episode takes place. It's kind of hard to track how many days it takes place, but it's interesting. I was thinking about if they had gone on, I think it was a 3-day trip that Tony had planned. And so I was thinking like, oh, maybe this is over the course of 3 days.
There's a lot of
that
clocks.
They
You actually
been...
can get a pretty good sense of time in this episode, and reference to the morning. And
I know. And actually, I have something else about time in there too for later. But like, what would have happened if they had been gone for this whole time, right? And all these different things that would have happened or not happened as they had been gone. And Tony and Carmela, like it was kind of mentioned, they never leave, right? They're always there. And they've never gone on this trip or whatever, right? So
it's actually never spoken of. It's a great case of just such like efficient dialogue. It's really interesting where they throw something out there and then they just leave us to figure it out.
Yeah.
It's talked about so little, but it kind of hangs over the whole episode in a way.
Yeah. The other time thing, just as I have it on my brain, and again, I was trying to track because of that framing of this episode with Tony bringing up this trip, but there is an interesting one where Carmela goes over to Meadows that first time by herself, right? And we, after that, have the scene at the casino, or sorry, no, we have a scene at the casino earlier. After the scene with Carmela, we have the first scene at the casino where Tony's dancing and whatever, right? Like, and Furio's fuming about it. Then we go to Carmela going to Meadows' apartment and saying, like, what's the matter? Is it Finn or whatever? And she's with Meadow by herself. And then we're back at the casino. So we realize that earlier scene at the casino happened, like, in the daytime, right? And you're in the casino and it's, like, dark and kind of, like, seems like it should be nighttime.
Right,
like,
interesting.
You're dancing with ladies and drinking or whatever. But because then we have that scene in between and then we're back at the casino.
Oh, wow.
Anyways, that was just my little time thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I was trying to track it.
Anyways, yeah.
Sorry, that was confusingly described, but hopefully you know what I'm talking about.
No, I didn't realize that. That's good.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how at the very beginning of this episode, it could be set up to be a very different kind of episode.
Yeah.
And also that kind of aspect of sort of running away from things or something. Tony having just been in Miami. Going on another trip. There are some interesting connections in this episode to the last one. What you were just saying about dreams, staircases for me, Meadow having this compassionate scene on a staircase, comparing to Tony's dream of his mother-like figure on a staircase. There's a lot of things. The last scene from the last episode being of Tony in Miami, and then one of the first scenes of this episode being about going on this getaway trip. Even though it was for business for him in Miami, there is something when you see him in this foreign environment that kind of links them for me.
Yeah. The other stuff that I have is I have some stuff about Polly.
Yep. It's interesting. I have some things too, but they're rather minor. I feel like the
you
bulk
were so
of this...
focused on Meadow this episode.
I just think this whole show's about her.
But... yeah, no, the stuff with Polly is really interesting in this episode. So I think we have actually, like, if I was going to pick a second character to talk about, it would be Polly. Johnny Sack's been telling him all along that, like, Carmine, he says things like, Carmine loves you and, like, stuff like that to him all through this season while he was in jail and stuff like that. He's very fond of you. And we see Polly, yeah, exactly. And we see Polly like going to Syl and complaining kind of about what, why he isn't in the good books or whatever, and Syl talking about his earning and stuff like that. But he's still kind of like up on his high horse and we have the stuff with Polly's mom and the other gals and stuff like that, right? And that's like where he feels the most powerful, I think, is like when he's defending his mom. But then we have that scene at that wedding, right? Where Carmine's there and Polly just realizes, like, he doesn't even know who he is. Right.
He looks in a mirror, which we've seen used multiple times.
And I like that scene where he looks in the mirror.
Sees who he is and then actually has a pretty radical character change.
Yeah. And it's really interesting for him, who kind of, like, seems like a pretty unchangeable character. Like, But we do see some of I'm struggling to describe this, but like we do see some of his underlying transformation too. Like even he points out to Syl, he's like, well, this shit all started with that Russian fuck, right?
Yeah.
Like talking about Pine Barrens.
As if that was Syl's fault.
Well, it was his pickup.
Right, yeah,
It
Polly
was
did a
his
great,
money.
very professional job with that one.
But, and again, like, we know that Polly's a little superstitious and stuff like that. So, I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting for Polly. And then we see him kill an old lady.
We sure do.
Very quickly for suffocation, but
Yeah, that happens very fast.
yeah. But that's pretty, like, dark for Polly,
Yeah.
I would say.
And yet it's not treated that way.
It isn't, but like it kind
It's kind of a light
like
scene.
But again, kind of like when you
Weirdly.
delve deeper into like Carmela's reaction to Furio leaving, and when you look at it, you're like, that's kind of not normal. Same with this one, right? It is treated really lightly, but
Right.
you're like, you just broke into that old lady's house and killed her.
Yeah.
Like, that's worse than these mob guys who at least are like have some kind of
Right, yeah, that's
reason
pretty-
for
it's pretty
killing
out, dude.
people. Like, you just wanted to rob an old lady because you found out she keeps her money under her bed.
Right.
So yeah, so it's I kind of like to do that with all media, right? Like, who's your narrator and who are you
Yeah.
trusting to tell you
Totally.
the story?
Right.
And what we kind of are
Right.
sold as something that's normal.
Yeah,
or
it's like a
whatever.
comical haha story.
Yeah,
This one time I broke into an old lady's house and killed her. And
yeah.
stole her
And then
money.
we just see him like giving Tony the money. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, and then of course we have the stuff with Johnny Sack and Carmine, right? So we talked a little bit about the tension, I guess, building there, but we have that scene with Johnny and Tony where, again, I can never understand how these guys are getting hints that they're supposed to kill one another. I'm always like,
Oh, are you kidding me with the Johnny Sack one? That was so strong.
it wasn't.
No, okay, the Carmine one, I'm just like, damn, that's some coded talk. But it's funny how those two scenes reflect each other in
Yeah.
this season, because I think it was in The Wait where Carmine calls Tony and drops the hint that he wants Johnny Sack to be
I
killed.
know.
But in this one, I was
Which
like,
I didn't get.
well, that's fair. That one's very subtle. In this one, I was thinking, wow, that's pretty, like, underhanded.
Really?
Sorry, in this one, I was thinking it was pretty blatant in comparison to how
I-
underhanded Carmine was.
I don't
It
know
would
how
be
these
a
guys
shame
are...
if something happened to him. It seemed like a lot.
I don't know how they're supposed to communicate. What if they just wanted to say it would be a shame if something happened to Carmine? Like that, like it's
Just
just
like
so...
call your friend to your car.
Well,
Just
I
speak in
know it
private.
is suspicious. And both Tony and Johnny do a lot of weird smoking in this episode.
Well, that's a really interesting scene. So when they're meeting at the restaurant, there's a very careful focus on John grabbing a cigarette right after he's turned down on his 40% deal, which we know that he doesn't believe in. And the cigarette being a symbol of being out of control. That's been displayed a lot in this show. It's interesting how we see John becoming more out of control and not
There's
being in control of the situation.
Bells tolling in the background that
Right.
fade into the church scene
Yeah.
when he's doing that. But then we have Tony when Johnny gets into the car with him,
Yeah.
like weirdly blowing out this cigar smoke
Right.
as Johnny gets in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too how Paulie, when he's at the wedding that Carmine is at, Carmine makes it clear that he's there because it's his housekeeper's daughter.
Right.
Which is like a further establishment of the distance between those two. Even though it was a distant relation to Paulie, it was a third cousin or something.
Yeah.
There still was like a blood relation to Carmine. It was through his housekeeper.
Right.
Like it's like beneath him or something. And he doesn't
Right.
know who Paulie is. I thought that was an interesting choice of relationships.
Yeah. No, you're right. So we'll see what happens with all that.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, I mean, little Carmine wasn't very much help.
He kind of turned. I love that scene too, because like at first he's all being like
Right.
Mr. Little Business Guy and,
Right.
and talking to his dad, and then once his dad says like something about Tony being like his son or whatever, then he starts to kind of like backpedal. He's like, oh, he calls
a
him
poser.
He's a poseur. Yeah.
And then it's interesting, right? Because there's like an example of manipulation there because Carmine says, I felt like he could have been a son. And then little Carmine, he brings up the phrase, cut him some slack, he hasn't been head of a family long.
Right.
Knowing that it's going to set off his dad because Johnny is there upset about this change of events. He's kind of like looking at Carmine like, oh shit, like what are you doing? This isn't what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And Carmine, that's an example of manipulation. It's pretty basic, but
Yeah.
he's saying he hasn't been head of a family for long, knowing that his dad then says,
They're
I've told
like a
you
glorified crew.
they're a glorified crew, which is, they make clear in the dialogue, this is something that I've told you.
Yeah.
And so little Carmine knew that and then is manipulating by throwing out that phrase and then sets off his dad.
Right.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Really amazing writing in this episode,
Yeah.
actually. There's some like little things like that
Who
that
is
are just
it?
so
Terrence
incredible.
Winter?
Pretty sure it's Terrence Winter, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, like with the thing with Polly, when he looks in the mirror and then he kind of has a character shift, that's a good example for me that works. Like, I believe that. I can kind of get
Yeah.
behind that and see that he would have that change.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's such a hard thing to do. And I feel like all TV, the reason why I just hate all TV now is because they're so heavy on these big moments and characters changing course off of something. And you're like, what the fuck? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, that's just not believable for the character that you've established.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. And yet in this show, they're so careful throughout the entire series to build events, to tie everything together, to have believable characters who would act in human ways, that when something happens like that, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And it can set things off in a new direction,
Yep.
but they've been careful enough with it that it works.
Yep. No, absolutely. The last thing I have is just kind of about the title and talking about Eloise.
Is it about Meadow?
It's I know. Let's end on a Meadow note. I was going through my kids' books that I have, and because I used to be a preschool teacher, and I have a copy of Eloise, and so I was really excited when we first moved to New York to go to the Park Plaza to see.
Right.
There's an Eloise store there, and like that is like, you know, like the book is about this child who lives by herself at the Park Plaza, and she has a turtle, she causes all sorts of mischief.
How independent. Why does she live there by herself?
I think it's kind of unclear. I can't remember.
Did her parents die?
No, I think her parents like travel around and are rich, and so she just stays.
How old is she?
I think she's like 6.
That's very irresponsible. They just left her with a turtle?
Yeah, I think it's a turtle.
Jesus Christ. These
Pretty
values
sure.
are all fucked up.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Like, it's interesting that Carmela and Meadow do have this tradition around Eloise, because it is kind of like, I don't know. It, again, going back to that independence thing, or actually the thing that made me think about it the most was when Meadow says, I'm not a child. And Carmela's like, well, actually you are.
Right.
It's kind of like that. And that's what I was kind of like trying to say with Meadow and her fancy New York apartment and stuff like that too, is like, she's not independent, right? Like financially she is still dependent, just like this Eloise's parents are paying for for her room at the Park Plaza. She like is friends with like a butler and stuff. I don't know. But like that is childish. And you can have you have this fancy life with princesses and Colin, and who I don't know what his story. He's from Ohio.
Yes.
But you have this you have this fancy life, and you kind of like think of yourself, and Eloise is kind of a brat too, like she's kind of like hoity-toity about how she goes about things, but really like you're just a kid. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else from the Eloise books?
I wish I would have. If I had known when I was doing this 2 days ago that we were going to watch this episode today, I would have.
You would have done some Eloise analysis.
I would have kept it out at least so we could look at it, but I packed it away.
Yeah, you would have read all the Leslie Thieler analysis of Eloise.
I would have.
I think it's an amazing episode.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's really great.
And I'm excited for the finale.
Me too. Also excited for the finale.
Yeah, I loved AJ's essay.
It was great. I would give it a C.
And I loved Furio's shirt.
I would give it an A+ European shirt.
Yeah. Oh, and goodbye, Furio.
See ya. Maybe he'll be back.
Oh, yeah.
It's a spoiler.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Furio's probably going to be back.
Right.
With his shirt.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right. Well, we'll be back soon. And if you caught 2 episodes on our last release date, we apologize. We put 2 episodes out on the same day.
And And we can't do that.
We can't do that. We won't do that again.
We try and put 2 episodes up a week, and that's hard enough.
Yeah, that's too much. Yeah, we can't do 4 episodes a week.
So, sorry about that.
Yeah.
It was Alex's fault.
That was my fault. I take full responsibility. And
anyways, we'll see you next time for the season finale,
Yeah.
and then I think for a season 4 recap.
exactly.
Okay.
See you soon.
Bye.